Welcome to the A to Z Running Podcast, where we help runners thrive. I'm Andy.
And I am Zach. And up next, we take part 2 of the Mistakes and Triumphs episode, where we examine the World Championships and how to minimize mistakes and maximize your triumphs. Next week is our monthly Q&A episode. If you have questions and you want to try to sneak one in for that episode, you still may have a chance. Go to AtoZrunning.com/question. That's it. AtoZrunning.com/question. Share with us what's going on, what your situation and context, and the question you would like us to answer on air. And we may be able to do just that. And if not next week, of course, we'll slide you onto the docket for the next one as well.
We've really loved connecting with you. We say that every week. Claire on Instagram wrote about how much she has enjoyed running by effort. And she wrote, "The person I am now seems to be stronger and more committed, but also loves life a little more. The person I am now loves moving more than ever and is more disciplined, but my focus is totally different. It took a lot to understand this, and finding the A to Z Running podcast has opened my eye to how really I should be running and why I run." This is like our goal, helping runners thrive. And it sounds like Claire is really thriving, and we really love that she shared that and that we could be part of her running journey like that. So
Your check is in the mail, Claire. Thank you for... Oh, wait, no, that's something else.
Well, we do have a promotion this week, and that is the hip hook. I have been using it now again after my hip labrum repairs because my hip flexors get very tight. And so I'm in like a really gruesome part of my rehab, and I'm doing a ton of core work, like 40 minutes a day of core work. So anyway, I have been using the hip hook again, and it's been great to help release my psoas and my iliacus muscles. They're very hard to get to muscle groups for trigger release, and the hip hook helps me do that. If you want to check it out and you want a discount, the code is ATOZ, A to Z, ATOZ at the hip hook website. So check that out. Aletha Health is where you find it, alethahealth.com.
And just remember that if you have missed some of our potential discounts or promotions or other things in the past, and you don't want to miss the chance when you need it, subscribe at AtoZrunning.com. All you have to do is look for the word follow, and in doing that, you'll get the monthly digest, which includes our best discounts and promotions that are available to you.
Yeah.
So you'll never miss out.
Very good. Well, let's get on to our main topic.
It's probably worth mentioning at the moment, if you're tuning in and you're thinking, this sounds a little different than usual, and especially if you're not watching, then you have no idea why. It does sound a little bit different than usual because we are sitting outside in front of a cabin in the middle of, well, we're not actually in the middle of nowhere. We're at a campground of sorts. And so this is our off-location recording
our
experience.
vacation recording.
You could call it that. But that makes it that much more exciting because now we can talk about running while we're like kind of lounging about outside and camping, which is wonderful. Okay, so let's get on to, quickly, before the main topic, some A to Z Runner highlights, because these are exciting times. Christy, Mark, and Julie all ran half marathons in some sorts in recent times. And Julie, in fact, was third in the age group, and so a top 3 finish there as well.
Yeah, and nice work to all 3. They're all gearing up for a fall marathon. So we've been having some fun this summer with the A to Z runners doing some racing. So very exciting.
It's good. Well done. All right, so noted that this is the second of a 2-part series. If you missed the first episode, which was the Mistakes and Triumphs episode last week, you should definitely listen to it. You don't have to go back and do that right now.
You can still enjoy this.
This will make sense.
Yeah.
Well, if anything we say ever makes sense, this might as well. So a quick note. I promised that we would come back to the topic in general before we get into the specifics of the World Championships. As we think about mistakes and triumphs, it's important to remember the not to-dos and to-dos of these things too. And one of my most important considerations and the lessons I've gleaned from so many of the greatest and best in these kinds of things is that we should not, we try to minimize mistakes, but we should not try to get down to 0 mistakes because it is not possible.
It's not possible.
and not very practical.
So we don't want to be hung up on making mistakes because they are opportunities to get better. Yeah.
Andy likes that one.
Opportunities.
And it's a good insight. But also, because they're inevitable, the assumption, we've never met anyone who hasn't made a mistake or had a failure at some
Even
point.
Eliud Kipchoge.
Okay, yes, that's true. He has lost some races.
Not many, though.
Not many. But the point here is that what do we do when we're experiencing the mistake is kind of the key, because we know that they're inevitable. And there's a lot of different great insights and wisdoms out there about how to deal with failures and mistakes and such. But as runners, we just have to we have to simply accept the fact that sometimes we achieve our goals, sometimes we don't. Sometimes it's a pleasant and enjoyable experience, and other times it's miserable. And that's all part of the same great thing that is our sport.
Yeah, and Zach said off camera, and I love it, it's okay to fail. It's okay. And for us
It better be, because it's going to happen.
It's going to happen. But yeah, as we're saying, like, what are we going to do with it? What are these mistakes that we're making? How can we improve for next time? All of it can be moving us towards continuous improvement, which a lot of us are looking for, striving for. So it's an opportunity.
Well, and speaking of opportunities, Andy and Zach might argue about this next point, but one of the things that I find contention with is the idea as well that you have to find a triumph in every experience. And I don't thoroughly agree with that, simply because there are going to be experiences. These are not the common ones, but there will be experiences when it's totally miserable. You don't like anything about it. Everything felt like it was a terrible failure, mistake, or just awful. That's going to happen sometimes.
But can the triumph be that you like did it?
I think it is entirely okay to say that was bad and I'm moving on. And that's it.
See, I think there can be something that's a triumph in every circumstance. I do. I believe that there is something
but
that
there doesn't have to be, is my point. Like, you can have a spot where it's like, I'm done with this, moving on. I don't even need to think about it anymore because that was just all bad.
Huh.
And I think it's great.
I've never had one of those situations. I've had really bad races, but I've always been able to come away with something that I can feel good about, or something that I can take with me that I was like, that was a triumph.
Well, you're a better one than me, because I've had
This shows a difference in like personalities. I'm the
situations.
optimist. He's the pessimist.
It's not that, though. I'm not being pessimistic.
No?
I'm saying you can have an experience that you don't have to find anything good in it. And you can simply say, that was bad, moving on. And I think that's liberating and a little bit empowering, because it simply means that you don't have to treat everything like it has this great potential.
See, I do. So let us know what you think. I want to know who's more Team Andy, who's more Team Zach.
Andy's stress levels are higher because she's always trying to find
No, I think
success.
that helps me liberate myself of fear, is knowing that there's something that I can come through triumphant.
Well, if there's one way to help with that thinking, and I do think there's value in this side of it at least, it's that we tend to also then measure success very narrowly, and we should not.
Right.
Simply being that success can be achieving a very particular goal, but it's important to also, and this is why I think that my perspective kind of is the same as Andy's, but I just am more pessimistic in general about it. But it's also about something much bigger than a single moment's experience. And that's why failure is okay, that's why mistakes are okay, and that's why, in my opinion, you don't have to try to find success in everything, because it's part of this good thing that we're doing.
Which is a success, in my opinion.
That is itself, running, among other things. And so that's why when I see something like the World Championships, and this is where I kind of go with something like this, is like, you go out there and these athletes are competing at the highest possible level, and some of them have miserable failures. And you can see it on their faces, you can see it in the results, all the different places that you might be able to identify that was not a good experience for somebody. But that is still just an incredible thing that we're a part of and participating in when we do it. And even though only 3 of the finishers medal, even though only one of them wins the race, every single one of them contributed to that race, that experience. Even the one that false starts in the beginning. And you can say, oh, that's a bummer, and it is for the athlete who gets disqualified before the race even is underway. An example with the sprinters, the distance runners don't really false start. I guess it has happened, but at that point, the line judges basically don't care. So, anyway, the point being, they're all part of the same thing that's happening, and you can definitely say my role in that was an unpleasant role at times. If I'm the one who did not achieve and such, but it wouldn't have been the race without all of the runners in it. And there's something to that. And I think when you look at athletes like Eliud Kipchoge, for example, one of the things that makes him such a positive force in the sport is that it's not just about him when he's doing it.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that we need to all run races for the other people in the race, because, you know, I want to beat every single one of you every time I run a race.
And so does Eliud, obviously.
And so does Kipchoge. But we're still part of it together. And that's, you know, it goes back to all of that stuff we talk about, the reasons why runners run. And for most people, the reason why we go and we run a race is because it's a thing where other people are going and doing it.
I love his quote, "A running world is a happy world." It made me think of that quote when you use them as an example.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, I agree. So in that being the case, this is where the mistakes and the triumphs together are making the experience. And so that's where we're going to take now our examination of the World Championships events in all of their thrilling excitement.
And this is a great transition because in the marathon, there's a lot of time for some of both. Triumphs and mistakes in the same race. And making mistakes and then salvaging them to still do something great. So the marathon has a lot of opportunity. And you have to be so tough, as so many say, mentally and emotionally, and through the whole thing, being able to have a clear head, even if you run into mistakes. And this women's marathon that we're going to be starting with.
Is that a mistake?
Well, that's the way the race played out. So it went
Somebody made that happen.
It went out super spicy. I mean, this is like under world record pace. It was like under 2:14 marathon pace for the women.
Somebody was excited.
Someone was very excited. And up there in the front, I think that we had Career up there and Chabet. So there's like, I mean, it went out spicy, and there wasn't separation right away. It was a pretty big group that still hung there for a bit. Before I get to more of how that unfolded, I do want to share the results of the race first. So it ended up being won by Gotaitam Ghebreselassie, and it was a battle in the very later stages. It did
Despite being so fast early.
But it did end up slowing down, but it was kind of like a survival. And that's what it really came down to, is like who could survive a marathon that started at that hot of a pace.
Well, it's not just that, though. It's who can handle a race that just isn't run in an ideal sense. And so you go fast and then you slow down and then you have to speed up later. Like, marathons don't feel good when you do things like that. Now, I would wager that the runner who could have just simply run her own race despite all of that and executed her best, her PR experience effort, probably could have had a chance at winning that race much better than someone who just tried to run with it.
Well, that is actually exactly what happened with one of our U.S. women who I'm going to get to later. She didn't win the race, but she had a PR and she ran her own race. So I'm going to get to that in just a little bit.
All right.
All right. You're like foreshadowing this.
I am.
But I have to say, Ghebreselassie did not lead this race. Judith Career led pretty much this entire marathon, and she was not happy about it.
She wasn't happy about getting beat?
At first, I think she was happy to roll in the front because it was like a nice big group there.
Oh, she didn't want to lead.
But she didn't want to lead the entire time, and so she kept pointing to Ghebreselassie, like, come up and help me, come up and help me. Ruth Chetnagedich was there and would go beside her for part of it too, but would never like take it from her.
Nope.
So Judith Career, now she hasn't run too many. She's fairly new-ish to the marathon, and she ended up running a personal best time.
Well,
and she
it was
claimed
fast.
her silver, so she did get a world medal, but she did a ton of work.
Well, here's
for
the
this
thing
marathon.
with this kind of stuff, and you saw this all over the place in these races, where someone's out front and they're trying to get someone else to take over. So they're like waving and get people, but
scowling.
You're in a race to see who's going to win. Why would anyone want to help you? What makes you think anyone in that race wants to help you when they're trying to beat you? Just don't do the thing you don't want to be doing, and you don't have a problem with it.
It's
all
true.
Judith Career had to do was slow down to a jog for a second, and then someone would have gone past her.
Yeah.
But she wouldn't do that.
Right.
As a consequence, they let her lead.
They let her lead. They let her work.
Despite her complaints.
But she did, like I said, she was rewarded for this hard work because she came away with this silver in a personal best time of 2:18:20. And
that's fast.
It is fast.
Not fast enough to win.
It came down, though, to a battle. And that's what makes it so hard for Judith's career, is that she had to do all this work. She almost won. She tasted the gold before it was taken away. It was fool's gold.
Look at you.
Man. I did not think of that beforehand. It's pretty cheesy.
Yep,
yes.
very cheesy.
So she was a silver medal, and then we have for our third place. Did I write that down? Of course I did.
Place.
Right? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Lona Cheptimai Salpeter, and
of Israel.
And I thought this was a really big triumph. When we're talking about triumphs and we're talking about successes and how races play out, Lona was in one of the chase packs, and in fact, she was in the third chase pack. So there ended up being three. There ended up being three, as these things happen. You know, they started out with the two bigger ones, and then they split off, and there was a second chase pack, and that was smaller. It was only a couple women. And then Lonith was in the third one, and she started picking off these ladies that were dropping.
That's exactly the way you want to run a marathon.
Yes.
And her quote was...
Yeah, she had a fantastic
right
quote. I remained patient after the ladies pushed early in the race, no matter how the race would unfold. Today, it was truly a fantastic achievement. The marathon starts at 30K. Wise words from Lona, which
Probably
were learned...
at one point being coached by some of Arthur Lydiard's descendants.
And her own,
yes,
possibly, but also her own experience, because if you remember in the Olympic Games, she ended up dropping. And that was a big upset because at that time she had one of the world records in distance racing. Was it, I don't know if it's the half, probably the half. Anyway.
I don't think so, but.
She had one of the records at one point.
Well, she's
Maybe
very
it was
fast.
women's only half or something, I don't know. So she's really fast. She was like favored to get a medal, and she ended up dropping in that race, which many did. So it wasn't just her, it was really hot and humid conditions in Tokyo. But in this race, she ran very smart, and she ended up picking off many, as I mentioned. One that dropped, who was a favorite, was Ruth Chepngetich.
Yep.
Due to some stomach issues.
Bummer.
Yeah, and I'm not going to try to guess as to why she had the stomach issues, but sometimes when things go out that fast, your body is not able to break down the fuel very well in the first stages of the race. And so when races go out fast, there is more likelihood for stomach problems because your body isn't able to break down that fuel quite as well.
Yeah, that's actually just, lesson for all marathoners. If your system is too highly active, then your energy systems are not going to process fuel in the same way. And as a consequence, this is why it's so important to go easy in the first half of a marathon.
Well, not easy, but
steady. No, but easy relative to
what you
your
feel
your
you
full
could
effort
do.
potential.
Yeah, right.
So,
you're not going to go and burn yourself in the first part.
Yep. And so when you get in a race situation like this, it tends to be the case that the women who are going to be the most successful are either the ones who can handle the race without needing the fuel. So whether that's because they trained that way or because, they're better able to handle the heat or, who knows. But they don't need the fuel as much, or it's simply not maximizing their system as highly.
Right. That means that they are able to actually process the fuel that they're taking.
Truth.
Yep. So I found that to be a very major success for Salpeter of Israel.
Indeed. Speaking of successes, the American women,
the
U.S. women,
they rocked
none
it.
of them medaled, but they ran the best three finishes in a
They
US
would have won
women's...
as a team if we scored this like cross country. They would have won.
Would they have? I don't know exactly where they...
they would have won.
They would have.
Yeah.
Because their top three were in the top 8 in the race.
Yep. So Sarah Hall was 5th in a time of 2:22:10. And as I had mentioned, she ran a really smart race. She started out back and she pressed toward the end. She ended up having to run alone for quite a bit as she was moving up to that 5th place position. And that's not easy, but it was very, she was running her own race, as they say. I know that's like super cliche.
Which is exactly what we've been talking about the whole entire time.
But running her own race while still utilizing in the first part of it, she didn't go until later. She was running with Emma Bates and one other, I believe it was a gal from Great Britain. So the three of them were running together for a significant part of this race, and Sarah then took off. And then Emma Bates is the one I wanted to mention, where Zach was pretty much giving a play-by-play for a champion's race, but she wasn't quite as fast as those other ladies, but she did run a champion's race, and she ran her own race the whole time. And she ended up running a personal best. And I don't
impressive.
think that it was like a perfect situation for that. Usually championship racing doesn't lend itself to.
Well, if you're running the championship race as it unfolds, but in this kind of situation, it's what's the course like and what are the conditions like? Because the World Championships energy around that event is very, very high. So if you don't have those super hot and humid ones, which is usually what happens in World Championships marathons, it's a decent environment for testing yourself, and if you're ready for it, like she was.
Yeah. You can ask my friend Rachel Frigurski, she was watching this with me, how many times I said, Emma Bates looks so good. She looks so relaxed. She looks amazing. And
you probably don't need to know how many times Andy said that, but you can guess.
Yeah. So Emma Bates has been on our show before. We're going to link to our podcast with her because it was pretty much about this type of situation where you're able to run based on your intuition and how you're feeling. And we talk a lot here about running by effort. That's how we train. And she's really able to race by effort in a really intelligent way. So she's mastered her instincts.
Finishing in a PR time of 2:23:18 in 7th place overall.
7th place.
Which then next across the line, rounding out the top 8, and for the United States, 3 in the top 8 was Kira D'Amato. And Kira, so all 3 of them did a different kind of race, but Kira is the one who tried to just stick the race where it was.
Yeah.
And it paid for it a little bit.
She paid for it, but I find it to actually be a success because I prefaced this whole thing.
Andy is finding success in everything.
But I preface this whole thing about having there can be a mistake, but then you overcome and you salvage and you come back because she intentionally realized at one point, I mean, it was pretty early in the race, this is too hot.
Yeah.
This is too fast. And she backed off. She actually backed off so that she could run with other people.
Yeah, yeah.
And so that was a great decision that she had to make. It was a tough decision, I'm sure, because she was in no man's land, but then she wanted there to be more people catching up with her. So then she ended up salvaging this race. More than salvaging it, I find it to be extremely victorious to be a top 10 finisher in your first World Championships. This is the first time Kira D'Amato has worn the U.S. jersey, and she's top 10. So I think that is a great way that you can have a mistake, maybe. I don't know if it was a mistake. Can we say that? Because she was shooting her shot. She was going after the race.
It was a mistake
physiologically.
In a sense. It was a mistake in a moment, but she resolved it.
She resolved
in the race,
and she ended up running a great race on, by the way, 7 weeks of specific marathon training since she didn't know she was going to be running this race as the alternate. So I think that was a success. So there's a lot more that we could talk about, but that's what we're going to talk about for the marathon.
So then jumping from marathon to track and back again, the women's 1,500 meter was one of those that we were anticipating with great excitement.
Yes.
Because Andy just wanted to see Faith Kipyegon win again.
I got the pleasure to do so.
If you're putting money on races, that's a decent bet that she'll win because she just does that.
Yeah. It was a really exciting race to watch, as the 1,500 seems to be one of the premier events for the World Championships as far as the hype that surrounds it.
Depends. This year, certainly. On men's and women's sides, because there were some great races, rivalries, dynamics. So in this particular instance, in the women's race, you had a indoor world record holder in Gudaf Sige from Ethiopia, and you had Faith Kipyegon, who wins everything. And so then, of course,
and Stefan Hassan, who won it last time.
She was not in the 1,500.
I'm no, sorry. She was silver in the Olympics.
She also was not in the 1,500.
Right. She was, though.
Not this time. So then you have the British star, Laura Muir. You have some up-and-coming Americans. You've got a lot of good things going on. And as a consequence, the question is, what kind of race is going to happen? And what happened was not what anyone expected, and quite frankly, was a justification of some of the things that we've been talking about here, which is nobody was ready for the race to be what it was, and the only people paying attention are the only ones who had a chance at a medal. And this is why. Gudaf Sige did not wait for anything except for the starter's gun to go off before she went flying, just moved. And so as a consequence, anyone in the race who's expecting what normally happens in a championship 1,500, which is kind of like a sit and wait and see who's going to go out kind of experience, that's usually what happens. In this instance, every one of those women wished she didn't do that. The only two who were paying attention was Faith Kipyegon and Laura Muir. And you know this because they immediately latched on to Gudaf Sige as soon as she took off, and the three of them ran away from everyone else like by leaps and bounds. They were so far ahead within the first lap that it was obvious nothing was going to happen except for those three. And then how it unfolded was just awesome. So first of all, Laura Muir was just there for the ride, and that makes sense because she does not have the kind of time that those other two women have run in terms of her personal best.
Or others
and she
in the
was
field.
not. Yeah, and Laura Muir was not. She had been saying she was not in the greatest shape of her life coming into this championship. She'd had a more difficult spring, but then, you know, she put it together just in time for the finals of the World Championships because she looked great still. So she's hanging on to the other two, and Faith Kipyegon and Gudaf Sige are just fighting, like almost literally physically fighting, and it was just so cool. Gudaf Sige was furious the whole time because Faith Kipyegon was like nagging her, like right next to her, right behind her, and just like a leech, and just the best possible race execution. And I think she got into Sige's head a little bit.
I think maybe that's true because she looked angry.
She looked angry and frustrated.
She does squint a lot when she.
Yeah, but she was like looking around a bunch. She was like moving her arms a bunch. She just looked frustrated, and as a consequence, Kipyegon had the advantage and showed it, and by winning the race. So if you didn't notice where we were heading with that, Faith Kipyegon took the win in a championship record time. I think. I didn't write it down here, but...
I have it here.
3:53, which is blazing. And then Gudaf Sige.
3:52.96.
Thank you. 0.96. I rounded. And then Gudaf Sige right behind her. And then Laura Muir, another second or two behind that. And then the next person was like 7 seconds back to fourth place. So it was just an awesome show to see between those two.
It was. And Sinclair Johnson was 6th place in her World's senior
World
debut.
Championships debut.
In 4:01. And then Corey McGee was 4:03, and she was 10th place. So 2 in the top 10 for the U.S.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like a race for fourth between everyone else.
Yeah, it was Halu in fourth, by the way.
Yes.
Yeah.
So good running all around there. That was a really exciting race. Lots more really exciting races to come. Okay, next up is the men's steeplechase.
Brutal.
Which, this was awful. It was awful to watch.
Intense.
It was like uncomfortable to watch the race because there was so much physical contact. People were tripping. People were elbowing.
Full
people
arm
were
pushing.
pushing.
Yes.
And then at one point I was just like, will anyone just speed up so that this isn't happening anymore?
It was
and
uncomfortable
no
to watch for sure.
No one wanted it to go fast. They all wanted to wait as long as possible. And as a consequence, it was super bunched up. They just kept saying, the announcers kept saying how close together they were running.
Yeah.
But it's also the steeple and you're jumping. You don't want to be that close together.
Yeah. And Zach has a good point, and he said it while we were watching the race. But the steeple is one that you kind of have an advantage if you're leading because you have a wide open space in front of you.
You can run a more natural gait.
Right.
In general, when you're not clumped up, but then in the steeple, because you're also jumping, you absolutely save energy by just being in front.
And we have noticed too, like Hillary Bohr, who is just consistently good on the world scene, he's from the USA, he likes to run in the outside near the front. And that has been, he stays out of trouble. And that is, I think in this race, it was half of the job was staying out of trouble.
Well, that's what it came down to is you had two types of people running this race. You had the scrappy brawlers, which was most of them, who just wanted to be, for some reason, really close together, fighting each other. And then you had just the patient guys, the time biters.
Time biters.
Yeah, that's what I'm calling them, time biters. And the ones who were able to stay out of trouble pretty much did best in the final result.
It's true.
Speaking of, winning yet another championship was from Morocco, Soufiane El Bakali, who stayed in the back of all of that craziness on the outside. So he was just basically running by himself a little bit, detached slightly, just watching the race unfold in front of him, watching everyone trip and fall and fight.
And run, I have to say, they're running like shortened strides.
Oh yeah,
and irregular.
everything.
They're irregular, so they're having to do more work, I think, when they're so close together. So
Except for El Bakali.
Yeah.
And then when it came time for the last lap, he just clearly was feeling spunky and energetic.
Yeah, because you also have to have that piece too.
Yes, and he had that blazing kick that by the time you get to that point and everyone's still tripping all over each other, he was just dominating them. Rounded out that last lap very fast. And then second place was Lamicha Girma of Ethiopia, and in third place, Conseslus Kipruto of Kenya, who dominated the steeple for a few years in the 20-teens and then had some injury troubles. Clearly he's doing all right.
Yeah.
He's back in top
None of them
form.
were surprising. None
No.
of them.
Definitely those are three. If we were to say who three are likely to have the best chance at medaling, those are three of the 4 or 5, for sure. And then the top U.S. finisher in 6th place was Evan Jaeger of USA, which is exciting because he's also coming off of a large stint of injury stuff and everything. And quite frankly, this was not the kind of race that he runs. This is not his style. And yet for him to finish 6th in that kind of a race, it's a positive thing.
Yeah, and he wasn't so happy with it, but...
No, as well he shouldn't have been
he
because it was
wanted
a
to go for a
terribly
medal.
frustrating race.
He was going for a medal, and I think a lot of these guys, a lot of these people that are in the World Championships, that's what they're doing. They have to have a belief that they can be on top, and so
got to do it.
Yeah, but I do think it's a great stepping stone. I think that this is we're going to see more of Evan Jaeger.
We at least hope so. Well, speaking of men's races, let's jump to the men's 1500. We're doing these chronologically as they happened in the World Championships. That's why it's just kind of weird how we're bouncing around. The men's 1500 was another one of those highly anticipated events.
Yeah.
Not
just because Zach likes.
No, not for me. For the championships, definitely we're talking a lot about this one. Sure. And it's because you've got Jakob Ingebrigtsen doing his thing, which is, winning a lot. You've got him in what looks like good form. He ran a blazing fast mile, almost a European record mile, not long ago. So clearly he was in good shape. And just like the cockiest he's ever been. And so
I think in indoor, didn't he get the 3,000 world record?
Broke some record in indoor, yes.
I think it was the 3,000.
I can't remember what it was. I thought maybe it was a shorter distance. But anyway, we don't have that in front of us right now. The point is you got half the world who's like loving it and wants to see him win, and half the world who's like super annoyed with his cockiness and wants to see him humbled. And, half of them got their wish, as these things go. So how it unfolded, though, was fascinating because in this instance, you had the Kenyans kind of trying to make their own race out of it, which is often a great strategy. Team up with your countrymen and try to kind of control things and make it the race you want to see. So Abel Kipsang of Kenya wanted a fast race.
Yeah.
And so he made it a fast race. What was strange, and what he would later say was a mistake, was halfway through the race when Jakob Ingebrigtsen took over the lead to keep the pressure on that pace, which is not normally the way he runs races. But I have noticed lately, I was telling Andy this, lately it seems like he likes to take over about midway through to make it fast. And so he did that. And it was fast as a consequence. And interestingly enough, he did not win.
He didn't win. It was
so he was
set
humbled.
up. It was set up where we've seen it a million times. Not a million times, that's an exaggeration. But we've seen it so many times right where Jakob likes to be, but just didn't have the final kick.
Didn't have the kick that, he had a great kick.
He had a kick, yeah,
it just
but it wasn't
the best kick
Yep,
in the race.
Exactly.
In fact, the upset comes from an unlikely source, although anyone who was paying close attention this spring said, I think he's got a chance, was Great Britain's Jake Whiteman. Coming around with about 300 to go around Jakob Ingebrigtsen's shoulder and then burying him. Now, he didn't run away from him, but his kick was so pristine. It just, everything was exactly what it needed to be. He was moving at the right time. His acceleration was perfect because he didn't overdo it at any point. And he had, even the last 20 meters of the race, still strong.
Yeah.
And his look on his face as he crosses the line.
His eyes were huge.
It was like that wonder.
Yeah.
It was wonder is what it was as he's winning the gold medal over the legendary Ingebrigtsen.
Yep.
It was awesome. It was so cool.
It was a really cool one to watch. And you always want to have at least one that an underdog wins. And I would say that this one was...
I wouldn't call Whiteman an underdog.
He was an underdog to what they thought was going to win gold.
Not the
they thought he could be a medalist, but they didn't think gold.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. That's true. That's true.
And so Katir was third.
And then, in bronze medal position of Spain, Mohamed Katir, and he ran a totally different kind of race where he did the thing of let everyone else do the work and then just have it when it counts.
Yeah.
And he was looking like maybe he could have won that thing.
Yeah.
But Whiteman and Ingebrigtsen they just kept flying down the straight.
I love the sit-in kick. I love that. Personally, I love to tuck in.
That's the way you like to race.
Yeah, but it was a little nerve-wracking for him to do that in the field that he was in. Like, I thought he should have been further up, but he was so, like, he waited so long, and he was so far back. I didn't think Katir was going to get it. To be honest with you, I didn't think Katir, in this situation, it was going to pan out for him because of the field and it being a championship and, you know, all the things. But, I mean, it did end up getting him a bronze. So I guess I can't say it was a mistake, but it was interesting because, you know, he had to work so hard, you know, to pass all those people there in the final stages. But, yep, he got his medal.
He did that.
Yep. Another race that many were watching, especially from the U.S., was the women's steeplechase, where we had 3 Americans in the finals, which is...
so much promise.
Yeah, so much promise. And it was, in and of itself, a triumph. But we did not see a medalist from the USA.
Yeah.
Spoiler alert.
Simply because of how the race happened. This is interesting, Andy, because I've noticed that this year, the classic championship racing dynamic was the least common for the distance races. The most common was something a little bit more unique. And in this one, it was much like some of the others we've described.
Run fast.
Run fast and hold on for dear life. Actually, though, I think this one in particular was fascinating because you had an unlikely execution from Nora Jaruto of Kazakhstan, previously of Kenya. And in particular, because of the way she basically seemed to operate like she was not willing to be in any position except for first.
Yes.
And it wasn't just that she wanted it to be a fast race. She was not willing to let... So, like, if someone came up on her shoulder, she would accelerate to keep them behind her. Every time.
She did not want to use somebody in front of her.
Which is weird.
She wanted to lead the whole thing.
Yeah, which is weird because the whole point of, like, you know, you want someone else to do the work so you can beat them in the end kind of thing. She didn't at all operate the normal way you would expect someone to do in a championship race. And so, as a consequence, we kept saying, there's no way she's going to win this thing because she's going to burn her legs out too much during the race, and then someone's going to pass her in the final 100 or 200 or something. Or she's going to, like, trip on a late barrier because she's so tired. Well...
that didn't happen.
That didn't happen. As a matter of fact, when it came down to the final stretch, she still had more than everyone else.
Yep.
Despite all the rest of those things she was doing. And so as a consequence, going out in such a blazing fast pace, there are only a few women who even tried to hang on after, like, the first couple laps. One of those was USA's Emma Coburn. She ended up paying for it because it was just
she went for it.
over
she went
her
for
head.
Broke. Yep.
And that's what you have to do in a situation like that. You know, you do whatever you can because there were enough women up there that, you know, you never know. So in this instance, she found out, and it was unfortunately not a success. Or at least not in that instance. According to Andy, all things are successes. So what ends up going down is Nora Jaruto wins the race in 8:53 championship record, which is very fast.
Yeah, and not far off of the world record.
Well, the world record is 8:44, but that's like 7 seconds faster than the next fastest time.
Why did I think that it was close?
Because when we were talking about it, I was like, this is like one of the fastest times in the world.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Because it is, in fact, like in the top few fastest, but the world record is just crazy fast. So in any event, it was a championship record, one of the fastest times ever run. And in second place was also one of the fastest times ever run by Werkuha Getachew of Ethiopia. And then countrywoman Mekides Abebe of Ethiopia also medaling in third.
Abebe looked good.
She looked great. And both of them... I thought she was going to win. Both of them like were making it look like they could take over that race. Yeah. And Jaruto just wouldn't let them.
Right. Yeah.
But they still ran well.
So you'll remember last week we talked about the prelims of this, or the heats, I should say, of the steeplechase. And Jaruto won her heat in what looked like she was...
She made it look like she was like trying to win the final.
Exactly, because she made up all the space, and she was so happy in the finish, and you know she was rejoicing and celebrating like the finals.
Yep.
From this win. I wonder if she just really loves to win. Like, just really loves to be in front.
Doesn't matter what kind of race it is.
And she got to control the race. But the celebration after this 3,000-meter steeplechase, they had to turn the microphone down, I think, because she was screaming. She was unleashed.
So excited.
She was so excited. It was really fun to see. We talk about triumphs, but you know, it's fun to see the celebration of that triumph.
Yeah, we've noticed, Andy and I watching these races, and we're watching kind of the reactions afterward. And the runners who are like subdued after winning the World Championships gold medal, you know, like $70,000 bonus for winning, and they're just kind of like, meh. I'm like, that's disappointing. Like, you should be excited.
You should be
pretty stinking happy.
Well, Sydney McLaughlin,
Right.
She like was subdued.
I know.
But I'm sure
I
she
think
was
that's
excited,
disappointing.
Right? She wanted
to watch
see her
her
go
finish
crazy.
in a world record time and just be kind of like, She just made like a $200,000 paycheck in that one 50-second race.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so that aside.
Yeah, that was a side
It was
note.
really fun
It
to
was
watch
fun to
Jaruto
see.
win that race,
Yeah.
and then just the excitement and the joy in doing so was cool.
And you know, Courtney Frerichs always wants to medal, so does Emma Coburn. Courtney Wayment, I'm sure, had her hopes too because she's, you know, hot on the scene. But Courtney did run a really strong race, in my opinion.
Which Courtney? There's
Courtney
two of them.
Frerichs. Courtney Frerichs ran a really strong race. She ended up in 6th.
Yep.
She ran more within herself in the first stages, and then she ended up picking people off.
That's true.
And so she ended up in 6th place, which this time in this fast of a championship race was not her day. But I think, you know, 6th place was a really great showing, and she ran a strong race.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good running.
Speaking of good running, which I think is like an understatement for all of this,
Good.
the women's
That should be the
5,000
title.
meter
Good
run.
running.
Good running. Good job. The 5,000. The team dynamics took a front seat like it did in the 1,500 for the men. And
This was really fun. This one
it
was really fun to watch.
Yeah, it was fun to watch. I'm not really sure how helpful those team dynamics were to them.
It depends on what you're doing.
Which one?
Well, it depends on what you're doing.
Which woman?
So in terms of like that team execution, sometimes, well, the examples are we're trying to run a race that specifically is the kind of race that has the best chance of beating the favorites. And so when you run a race in that capacity and you can execute it fully, it often has a chance of success. But that's not what they were doing here, which is what was strange to me.
Yeah. To give you the team, since we didn't say that yet, it was Ethiopia. So the women of Ethiopia, and that's Gudaf Segay, Lezntezabet Gede, and Dalit Siam, they were the 3 that were controlling the race. Period. They were always controlling the race.
Specifically, Gide was like directing the other 2.
Yeah, there's a lot
telling
of
them what to
conversations
do.
going on. Lots of conversations.
And Sige was not super thrilled about the fact that Gide kept telling her what to do, but she still was doing it.
Yeah.
So that was cool.
Yeah, so they were trading off leads throughout, and it ended up that only one of them got a medal.
Paid off for one. So that
I'm sorry, 2 of them got medals, right? Yes, 2
I
of
don't.
them.
You
Sorry,
didn't write
sorry.
the result here.
No,
so
no,
I'm
I
not
have
quite
it
sure.
here. Yep. Siam ended up with the bronze,
Oh, okay,
but
yes. So-
Lentezabet Gede, she was like the puppet master of the whole thing. She didn't end up getting a medal, but remember, she already has a medal. The
Oh,
10,000.
she doesn't need any more of those. Well, yeah. So that was what was interesting. Is Gide was the one kind of like clearly trying to puppet master is a good phrase for that.
Yeah.
That's what she was doing.
Puppet mastering the race.
And it paid off for the other 2.
Yeah.
We always talk about in a team execution kind of situation, almost always there's some amount of carnage. Like someone's going to pay for that because it's not their race. They're running someone else's race. And in this instance, it looked like Seum was not running her own race because she was struggling a little bit more than the other 2 earlier on. But as it happens, it may not have been that she was struggling as much as she just didn't want to do what Gide was telling her to do.
Maybe.
And so instead ran a different race. And she kind of like changed over to her own race instead.
Yeah,
which
Gide was
worked
very
out.
happy for her countrywoman though. At the end, she was celebrating as much as if she would have won a medal. So
She actually kind of looked like she did win a medal with the way she
Yeah, I know,
celebrated.
she's like
but
in the
all right.
pictures with the flag there. But
Commandeered a little bit of attention.
Well, I mean,
but deserving in the
she was
sense
helping.
of yes.
She felt like she helped her
There was a
teammates
together,
out.
yeah.
There was a togetherness. That's really great to see. So let's talk about how this actually played out, though.
Yes.
So Stefan Hassan, she played it cool in the back of the pack, and she slowly made her way up throughout the races, which is what she's been doing
She
lately.
did what she needed to do to have
Yeah.
the best chance of winning, for sure.
Yeah, but in the final 200, actually it was over 200, Stefan took the lead, which was like, I think one of the only times somebody else had a lead in this race besides our Ethiopian women. And she put herself in medal contention. This is what she needed to do in order to try to get a medal. But in the final 100, just did not have the same kick. And, you know, she said, these other ladies are just better than me. But Zach was like, well, that's not necessarily true. Maybe she's just not in good of shape right now. But her previous success would say she is just as good as these other women. It was just not, she's just not there right now.
She wasn't as sharp as she's been in the past.
She doesn't look as sharp or as smooth even in her gait. She doesn't have like a perfect running form, but she probably looked a little bit more strained than she usually does.
Well, in any event, so
we don't need to get the
not
breakdown
how
of form.
exactly Stefan Hassan looks. But the other side of this that was fascinating to me is that Gudaf Sige has done a lot of work in the last week of races.
She has.
Because recall, she tried to beat down the 1,500 meter runners by a very aggressive race.
She already had a silver, yeah.
She already has a silver from that and a very aggressive race. And then come to this 5,000, and now she's being directed by Gide to do it again. Now, she didn't have to do it alone because Gide took over some. Like, they went back and forth quite a bit, which was kind of neat. However, Sige has done a lot of hard running from the front of a race already. And it became clear that she's just simply is able to handle that fairly well.
Yeah, she's a strong runner. I mean, there's no doubt about it.
Because she has a silver coming into this race and walks away with a gold from this one.
Now, you're probably all wondering, like, who broke up the Ethiopians?
We're not talking about relationships. We're talking about races.
In the podium finish. So I'm going to call this one of our major successes. Beatrice Chabet of Kenya was fourth of the bell.
Yeah.
And she was always hanging in there. She was always like right there, but looked pretty calm and collected. I mean, there was some shoving, some things, but she kept her cool. She kept collected. And then her success was that she kept herself in the mix without getting into too much trouble and ended up having what it took to run that final 100 and get that silver medal.
Yeah. Now, the consequence of the race unfolding as it did and where the carnage was greatest was that it was not a very consistent race pace-wise, which could have been the intent. That could have been what the Ethiopians were trying to do, was just make it a very uncomfortable race for everybody.
In fact, Elise Craney called it herky-jerky.
Herky-jerky is
She said it was
the
a
right way to describe
herky-jerky
it.
race, and that it was kind of what they expected, but that took her kick. She had no rhythm during the race, and there was a lot of surging and things happening, which that is one of the ramifications and why a lot of times people will let groups go and then chase them back, not make a quick reaction, instead have it be an extended catching, which, you know,
extended catching.
like you reel them in, it takes a little bit more time if they make a surge.
So there were two places you wanted to be in this race because of the nature of it. You either wanted to be in front, which is, you know, why they were doing what they were doing, or you wanted to be in back. Because what happens here is you get this crazy accordion thing that's going, where every time there's a pace change, there's kind of like a slow response time throughout the group. And when you're in back, you can kind of just stay out of the back and forth constantly. Just kind of keep a steady rhythm. Sometimes you move past a few people. Sometimes they pass you a few and, you know, accelerate suddenly. That's all good. But you didn't want to be in the middle.
No.
And that's where most of the women were.
That's where the U.S. women... Well, I mean, Infeld was like towards the back, but anyway, Carissa ended up dropping out.
Schweitzer dropped out. She had an injury.
She had a little
issue.
Strain, I guess. She had a strain, and
well,
we
it was
could
obvious
see
when it happened. Yeah, there was a
like
moment
all of a sudden
where she was going from running like strong and naturally, and then suddenly she like started gimping it a tiny bit, and it was clear that
pretty soon thereafter. And Elise Craney still tried to keep connection, which she did until 800 meters to go, and that's what she said. Usually 600 is when she starts making her kick, and she said that she had nothing. I mean, she didn't have nothing, but she didn't have the same kick that she anticipated. She was anticipating a strong last 1,000 of this race, and it just wasn't what she hoped she could get from her body with the herky-jerky. You know. And so I say the takeaway from this, and the mistake that maybe we can learn from, is that we don't try to make quick reactions. I know that races happen in an instant, and maybe in the 1,500 or like some of the shorter races, that's a great tactic. But in some of these longer races where you do have a little bit more time, to keep your cool, don't let yourself get defeated. Don't bring your eyes to the downward. So a lot of times when someone passes them, they look down. If you keep your eyes on the person ahead of you and you just reel them in, don't lose your confidence, say, I'm making this move, but I'm making this move in a smart way, then hopefully that herky-jerky won't happen to burn your legs for your final kick.
For all of us running championship races in the near future.
I say that this can be applied, though, to any situation that you're running with others in a race. And if they make a surge, or if they're, let's say you're running something like Boston that's really hilly and you're losing people going up the hill, or, you know, you want to keep connection to people, but they make a surge of some sort that you're not feeling like, because you're being in tune with your body, that you should be making at that time. You just take that same mentality where you're like, I'm going to match this move, but it's going to take a little bit longer than an instantaneous surge of energy.
Well, let's go ahead and finish the last couple events here. On the final day of racing, we had two more distance events. The men's 5,000 meter was an a kind of redemption race, you could say. We'll tell you why in a moment. But also, it was incredibly annoying for me to watch.
I don't get annoyed when I'm watching.
I was annoyed watching it, and mostly because it was just kind of like one of those wait around races where everyone's just not really interested in doing anything crazy. And I like the crazy, exciting ones where people are doing all sorts of strange stuff a little bit more. But in this event, they kept saying how hot it was too. It was quite a bit hotter.
Yeah, it was.
For this race than a lot of the other ones we've been talking about. And so they had water on the track. And a lot of guys were like running out and grabbing water off the tables.
Not a lot.
It happened like
just
4 or 5 times.
Okay, well.
It was a fair bit.
I mean, more than you'd expect.
For a
you'd
5,000
expect
meter
none of them
race.
to, because they run like 13 minutes.
Do you really need water in a 13-minute race? Well, here's the point. You probably don't need it, but if it makes you feel more
better.
refreshed,
Yep.
it certainly has some value. One of those was Jakob Ingebrigtsen running his double.
Early.
So coming back for the 5,000. He did like 2 or 3 times, went out and
Early
grabbed a cup of
on.
water. Yeah, it was kind of funny. And then Andy was like, I thought he was going to dump it on his head, but he doesn't want to mess up that hair.
Oh,
so
he's got good
instead,
hair.
he was like just sipping from the cup for a little bit and then toss it off. So that was a strange one, because all these other races where crazy things were happening, and then this 5,000 was like the exact same kind of race that you always see in the championships, or that you at least think you're going to see. And so it was a lot of, run slow until it's time to run fast. And it wasn't that slow. It wasn't like they were just totally jogging like they do sometimes. But it was like slow enough that everyone was just kind of
Still there.
running comfortably.
Yeah.
Is the best way to describe it.
I have to say, it was a very exciting race to watch if you're a fan of Team USA, and Grant Fisher of Bowerman Track Club. Also, he grew up in Michigan, so we've been keeping track of his running for a long time. And he was running a really strong race.
I would say Grant Fisher did everything right. Perfect execution.
Do y'all hear that? That's coming from Zach.
Until, what's his name, Jacob Kropp?
Yep.
Jacob Kropp cut him off with 100 meters to go and tripped him up.
Yeah, he was in medal
And
contention.
I will never forgive him for that. Because that, first of all, Kropp should have been disqualified. You cannot impede someone's progress in the last 100 meters of a championship final and not get disqualified. He cut right in front of Grant Fisher. And you know it because Grant Fisher tripped up, stumbled.
Yeah.
He didn't go down, but he stumbled, and that was it. He lost all momentum right in the final kick.
Yeah.
And he was ratcheting up. He was looking great.
It looked really good for him.
Can't
It
stand
looked
this.
like he was going to claim a medal.
You can tolerate a lot of contact in running races, but when you're in the last 100 meters and you impede someone's progress deliberately, that's it. You got to be disqualified.
Yikes.
So anyway, Kropp
Zach has strong feelings.
Kropp came across the line in the silver medal position, which would have been Grant's. Would have. And then Oscar Shalimo in third in the bronze medal of Uganda, which was kind of like a surprise. He just wasn't in the talk for a medal contention because there were a lot of legendary voices, legendary names in this race.
Voices, legs. Legendary
legs. In any event, Shalimo had a stunning kick, and so he definitely earned that medal. But in the redemption moment, Jakob Ingebrigtsen comes around that last lap and powers home the kick that he should have had in the 1500, running like he had something to prove.
Yep.
And took away the gold medal in the event that people weren't anticipating he would win.
He seemed very pleased afterwards.
As well, he should have
and
been.
very, very tired.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is the difference between Jakob Ingebrigtsen in the 1500 and in the 5000. Is simply in the 5000, he was proving himself. In the 1500, he thought he deserved it. There's the difference. Okay. That's why he lost the 1500. That's why he won the 5000.
And
because he's good enough to win both of those races. Like Jakob Ingebrigtsen at his finest could have won both of those races as they unfolded. And he should have won the 1500 because it was the kind of race he tends to win.
And he wasn't a given for the 5000 at all. Nope. It was actually surprising. It was surprising for us to see him do so well in this event. And he did seem calm, which he often has a poker face, but when he was taking his water, he was amping up the crowd for a second.
He did do that quite a bit.
Yeah.
That was so after that 1500, he apparently felt like there was something wrong with the crowd.
Yeah.
Because in the 5000
Your fault, crowd.
heats, he's like in the home straight on a, this is a preliminary round, and he's like waving the crowd up to their feet and stuff while he's like coming in third place in the 5000 heats. And I'm like, what are you doing?
He did in the final too, though, when he grabbed his water.
And so then he did it again in the final. Like he's just trying to get the crowd to make some noise. And I'm like, you know what? Good for him, because he's right. American crowds are terrible in track meets. They just don't understand how to be a good crowd in a track meet. which is, just make tons of noise the whole entire race.
And come to the meets.
Well, there
right?
were a lot of people there, so we had that part
I know,
down.
but in general, we're trying to train a crowd.
Yeah.
We're trying to train a crowd.
Well, he was
here,
doing
and
exactly
Jacob
that.
Did. And as well as secure his gold in the 5,000. So that was an exciting race to watch. Well, probably my most highly anticipated race. The 1,500, I said that. The marathon, I mean, there's so many that I love. But the 800.
Andy was so excited for this 800.
So excited because we had 3 U.S. women in the 800 who were possible medalists. There was
because all 3 have won medals of different types.
There was an outside chance that we could do a sweep. I mean, Keely Hodgkinson, it's something would have to happen. We talked about that.
We felt like there was a potential
to have a sweep. Well, although that didn't happen, it was still an exciting race to watch. And how did it unfold? Well, we had a Thing Mo who didn't take the lead cutting through the cones. Usually when they have their little green cones,
straight to the front,
she will take the lead. But they're not always green.
Anyway, when they cut in around the bend,
usually she pulls up to the front.
She likes to take off.
Which she didn't do this time. She sat in second for a little while.
I think I know why she didn't do it this time, though.
Why?
Because I don't think she's as fit as she was last year.
Oh.
I don't think she's quite as sharp. And so she decided to try to run a slightly different race to have a little more left in the end. And I'm glad she did.
She needed it.
Holy smokes.
It was exciting in the finish. 2 20-year-olds, a Thing Mo, and Keely Hodgkinson.
Once again, 1-2. They did it in the Olympics. They did it again here.
Out.
Okay, Hodgkinson thought she won this race. Yeah. With 100 to go, she thought she had it because Mo made the tragic error that everyone seems to do, which is you're winning the race, you come around the final bend, you've got 100 meters to go on the straight, and she started drifting to the outside. Never drift to the outside. You have to make people go around you. Well, Keely Hodgkinson saw the opportunity and started charging up the inside. But at the last second, I keep telling Andy, I wish you could see it more clearly in the race, but Mo clearly at one moment realized Hodgkinson was going to pass her, and she stopped drifting out just enough so that her arm was in Hodgkinson's way, was blocking her, and that disrupted her momentum a tiny bit, and is the only reason Mo won that race, because Hodgkinson had all the momentum and was about to go around her.
And this time, it's not illegal, because she didn't move to be in her way.
She didn't impede
she just
Hodgkinson.
Didn't move all the way out to get out of her way.
Yeah, so Hodgkinson didn't. She never ended up having enough space to pass her.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if she could have though, because they were like, I mean, it didn't look like she was slowing down at all.
Well,
they were both amped up.
The coolest finish ever that happens every once in a while in these situations was a side by side, stride for stride down the entire home straight. No one accelerated more than the other. The two of them just kept
top speed.
going. And it stayed exactly that way all the way across the line. Yeah. And Mo won by like 1/10 of a second over Hodgkinson.
Yep.
Wow, that was frightening and really cool.
It was a really cool thing to see, and it was a fun race to watch. And I'm sure that one will be on NBC Sports, so I'll link to that. You'll want to see this beautiful moment of track and fields. What do they say? Brilliant moment of track and field when they're so full of running.
That's our favorite new phrase. So the
full
announcers,
of running. We haven't heard that one before. That's
yes,
not new
we've heard it, but it's just we heard it so much.
Yeah.
That's what the British announcers will say, and so far they're the only ones I've heard say this. But the British announcers will say when they describe someone who's like really
coming on strong.
Yeah, really strong, running really well. They don't have to be like in a sprint, but they're just really strong. They describe them as being full of running.
Yeah.
And it's so cool.
I love that description.
I want to be full of running. Yeah. I love it.
And we want to also mention our other U.S. women. Raven Rogers ended up in 6th.
So her classic final kick was there, just wasn't quite fast enough.
That is one thing I wanted to say about this race, because Raven Rogers has a very distinct tactical style.
She has one tactic.
She runs in the back, and then she beats people.
Yep.
She charges and she beats people. Now, I would want to say, and if I may so boldly say, that she probably should have moved herself up a little bit further, knowing this field was so fast.
Well, yeah, so that race strategy works for her when you're running against 800-meter runners that go out too fast and can't hold. But these two, specifically, Mo and Hodgkinson, are known for going out fast and kicking in the last 100.
And it wasn't unusually fast for them. I think
it's
it was like 57-ish high.
That's about as fast as they tend to go out. But the point is they both have a last 100 kick. And so you already know you're not going to beat both of them if you're Raven Rogers because you're too far behind when the kick starts.
Yeah.
So your only chance at a medal is to beat whoever ends up in third in that instance, and that's not the best gamble in this race strategy.
Yeah. So I feel like if Raven Rogers was like more mid-pack when she did this, she would have more of a chance because she did have a good kick.
She did,
It just wasn't quite enough. She was in 6th place, and then Ajay Wilson was in 8th. And she just never really connected. So she ran a great semifinal. So, her rounds leading in, it just wasn't her day. So.
And we should mention in 3rd place, the bronze medal went to Kenya's Mary Mora.
Which is not a surprise.
And at the start of the race, Andy and I were talking and we said, are they going to sweep? Is there going to be a U.S. sweep? And my point was either there's a U.S. sweep or Mo, Hodgkinson, and Mora are the 3 medalists. Those are my 2 scenarios.
He did actually make that exact prediction.
That was my exact prediction.
Exact prediction.
Now, Andy is my witness.
I am.
Now you can all pay me later.
I wish there was a little bit of gambling. No, just kidding.
So if I can reflect at large at the moment and kind of bring our topic back to the pertinent reflection for all of us, one of the things that's just been on my mind all week as we're watching these races is, in principle, the difference between trying to beat everybody else and trying to get to the end first. Okay. So in my mind, it's those 2 scenarios. You're either trying to beat everyone else or you're trying to get to the end first. If you're trying to win a race.
Most of us aren't.
No, I'm saying if you're trying to win a race.
Okay.
And so in principle, there's a very distinct difference between the 2, which is if you're trying to beat everyone else, you run their races. You do what they're doing and try to beat them at it. If you're trying to get to the end first, you run your race across the finish line first. I don't know exactly how best to say that. You run your race in terms of the best possible chance to win. So this works for all of us running distance races, especially the longer stuff. We almost never benefit from doing something that is optimized for somebody else. And in the event that we do, it almost never feels the way we want it to feel or goes the way we want it to go. And so in principle, the goal here, and this is where it doesn't matter if I'm trying to win the race, the goal is that I'm trying to get across the finish line as fast as I can, right? That doesn't mean that I run the first few miles as fast as I can. That doesn't even mean that I run the first few miles on the same pace as the end miles. I'm simply trying to get across the finish line as fast as I can. And to do that, you have to run the best type of race for that objective, not for any of the other things that are happening in the race. And that's where the tricky piece here goes. When we're thinking about how to achieve at our highest level for any one of us runners out there, how to minimize the mistakes in competition, in contest, the first answer to that always has to be, what is the best possible race to get me across the line as fast as I can go? And there is an objective answer to that.
Run your race.
Straightforward, there's an objective answer to that. Start off easier, accelerate later, especially the longer the race, the more important that approach is.
This is a tip. Typically, you're not going to bank time. That phrase is out there all the time. Banking time.
There are scenarios where a runner can do that.
In 800, for instance.
Well, in lots of different events, if you're trained specifically to do that on the one side, but also remember that that's not the way our energy systems are optimized either. They're optimized to exert greater effort later in the degree of thing, because the higher the exertion of effort, the more our body's going to resist us. And it's really good at resisting us. As a matter of fact, our emergency systems inside are really good at stopping our body from working when we're doing things we shouldn't. So wait until late to do that.
And I would venture that at least half of you listening are marathoners, and it specifically is not great for the marathon.
Yes.
So
yes,
let's just keep that as one of our main takeaways from this conversation, where we try to get the most out of our running for us to thrive not only in our lives but also in racing, because we would love for the rewards of our work to play themselves out in a way that can help us see our best for our fitness.
And if you're thinking, you know what, I like the stuff you guys are talking about, but I'm not exactly sure what to do with it to make it work for me in my situation, we might be able to help you further. Certainly just send us a question, email a question. We'll put it on the episode, we'll talk about it, we'll answer your questions. But also, head to AtoZrunning.com and look for the word coaching. We offer a number of different services. They are not all the same. They don't necessarily require a 1-year commitment to coaching if that's not the right fit for you. So head there, take a look at what's there, and maybe we can help further as well.
Thank you so much for joining us. on this exciting episode talking about the World Championships, and we will talk to you next week.